All right, everyone, it is interview time, and we are here with Wyoh Lee of Sex Stories, the podcast, and she does so much more than that too. And I was listening to her podcast the other day and loving it because it was highly entertaining, and I actually learned a lot at the same time. And I think some, not just podcasts, and I'm not insulting people, but I think people go either the entertaining route or the educational route. And I love other podcasts that bring in both sides of the experience of talking about and learning about sex. So be prepared to learn a lot and probably be entertained, maybe some laughter, maybe some education, all the things. And you already heard a little bit about Wyoh in the intro, but Wyoh, can you please tell our listeners how you got to where you are today in the field of sexuality?
Absolutely. And I am so excited to be here. And I will say it was completely an accident. I didn't mean to do anything sexy. I was just trying to get laid and getting rejected a lot. So my origin story sex-wise is one of rejection. I tried 4 times before I got to have a partnered sexual debut, and it's not because I was mean, and it's not because I wasn't cute enough to get fucked. It was, well, now, after interviewing hundreds of people and doing deep, deep research, I realized that there were lots of social cues that I was missing, lots of assumptions I didn't share. I had been kind of raised with the cultural narrative that I think some others are familiar with, that like, if you're a lady body human and you're horny, all you have to do is say yes to a willing candidate. But I have a very unique kind of backwards special skill at really terrifying people who clearly want to have sex with me.
Terrifying them?
Yeah, on accident. And so in my efforts to kind of get to the bottom of that, I did discover transcendent sex. And then I was like, oh my, and that happened to be the same year as Me Too was breaking. And I was like, wait a second, sorry, what's happening to all of you out there? Because it was a completely backward experience from my personal history. And so from there, I was like, oh man, I've just discovered kink. I understand these conversational tools of explicit communication that are so helpful. Why can't other people have them? Why don't they have them? And I think I thought that I would like interview a year or two's worth of people and then like figure out sex and move on. But really it, kind of veered my mainstream entertainment background. Like I went to film school, I've been working as a photographer. I've been a photographer since I was 12. And now my whole life is sex because it is my hyper-focused special interest. And my bucket list just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And I, like you said, every day I can't help but learn things. And I'm like, oh my God, how am I still learning stuff about sex? So that's kind of the main highlights in a nutshell.
I love it. And so many of the things you talked about, like the rejection and the bucket list, actually, those are some of the questions I'm going to ask you because I think that they're really interesting for listeners to hear about and will really help them to understand more of it to implement in their lives. I'm pretty sure that we have the best job in the world. Like we get to talk and learn about sex every week. Look, we're not even paying for sex education school, and you get this too, right, Wyoh? Like we're constantly just in sex education school, and it's fun and it's exciting. So
yeah, and we don't have to like go out into the world and do hard things unless that's what we want.
It's like what kind of hardness you're talking about?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay. I want to start with something that I was reading. Something called, I'm gonna say this right. Is the Whorearchy? Am I saying that right?
Whorearchy.
Whorearchy. Yeah. Okay. So I'm dying to know, what is the whorearchy and how is it related to the social expectations that drive sex-related commerce? I need to know about the whorearchy.
So a little background. First of all, I didn't coin that term. A lot of people are hearing it from me for the first time, but I think I learned it from Melanie Crystal, the creator of Laurels. And so love her. Love
and
Laurels.
I love Laurels. Oh my God. mylaurels.com, I think, right? Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah. And so basically, Sex Stories was supposed to be a passion project, a short-term passion project. And then the more I got into it, the more I found myself getting censored. And I was like, I'm not even making money. Wait a second, I should be making money off of it. Like, oh my God, I have and all those emails that come from that. And so I was like, okay, I'll try to make some money. And then I got increasingly censored in all these accidental ways, right? I'm such a rule follower. I grew up on a farm, military, medical, professional parents. Like, I like rules. I'm a kinky submissive. Like, just tell me what to do so that I know what to do and I will do it. And that is not how our world works. And then as I started to try to make money on this thing that was like related to this topic, that I'm like, this is a good topic. I am doing it educationally, but with story-based things, because entertainment should, whatever. My philosophy is on entertainment and erotic education, or rather, my philosophy is on erotic entertainment is that it's the best way to learn about sex, right?
So tell me what erotic education, erotic, because I have actually never heard that term before.
Oh, maybe I made that one up. So everything that I'm doing going forward, in terms of crossing off my bucket list, and I'm jumping ahead, I am documenting to create edurotic content. So it is erotic. There will be like full naked me. You can already find my masturbation, meditation, explorations of edging. The month of September, I didn't let myself come, but I did touch myself for a lot of minutes every day to like explore different sensations. So that to me is an example of, yes, it's erotic, but also the point is to learn and discover from another person who's learning and discovering themselves. Because for me, the big thing that's missing on the screen with a lot of porn is in film school, I went to USC film school, I learned how to kind of understand the emotional context of on-screen storytelling. For me, that's oftentimes missing in erotic content, even if they're having like a really good time, because it's a different skill to translate the real thing into the picture that helps the audience feel that feeling. So that's kind of what I'm obsessed with now. But jumping back, I was getting censored. I was like, what the fuck is happening here? Why is this happening? And then I realized that we live in a world where we are definitely allowed and encouraged to sell things with sex implicitly. So, think the really sexy hamburger commercials, all of the like ladies can be so sexy as long as they're supposedly being regular. And so I finally started to learn, I have a very literal brain, very literal. I miss a lot of social nuance, a lot of social cues. But I look like a classically pretty blonde-haired, blue-eyed, all-American farm girl, which I am. And so I realized it was like February of coming up on 2 years ago that I was like, wait a second, am I in the hot girl category? And realized that like I had been behaving like, there are expectations that people have, especially when it comes to sex in society, and talking about it directly out loud. I mean, you have a whole lot more experience of this than I do, but I didn't know how to implicitly communicate around it. I'm like, but how often do you get hard? And are you nervous when you suddenly are not hard during a a sex session and you can't put it in? Why does that make you nervous? Like there's all this nuance I've been missing for years. And, I then was like, wait a second. Well, if I like sex, if I'm actually not shy in these ways, if all that's been holding me back from being a sex worker is just like not going to do that, that seems like money left on the table. So I went to, and also because I was talking to another podcaster that was like, what do you mean you already have like fine art erotic nudes up on OnlyFans? You are a sex worker. And I was like, am I? He's like, did you make money off of it? I was like, a little bit. And he was like, well, people are getting off to it. I was like, yes, but that's not like I didn't create that stuff with that intent. It's like me like posing silly as a shave head woman trying to figure out if she's still sexual as a kind of like a robot looking creature, because for 6 years I had totally shaved head. This is like a year and 2 months into growing my hair back because of this exploration. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll just go be a sex worker. So for the last 3 years I have been exploring different aspects of sex work, both directly and through interviews. And I realized, I'm slowly having so many realizations that there is a lot of fantasy and like social dancing that happens even in that world, right? And so I'm a person who people tend to like sex stories because they like how open and honest and clear I am. And that does not translate very well into sex work. It means that a lot of people think that I am their free, on-demand girlfriend, and that is what I'm learning about now.
Yeah. So April's not here right now. Oh, by the way, I didn't say that April's not here, everyone. She had another thing. It's my fault with the timing over here, but April's here energetically. But we talk about how we love and appreciate sex work so much, and I think it's such a broad umbrella of what sex work could be. And so if you're defining it as okay, you put some pictures on OnlyFans and you made some money because some people bought it or like paid to look at it and got off to it. I mean, I'm pretty sure as all of us podcasters who talk about sex, I mean, we've received emails from people who are like, totally masturbated you. And we're like, good for you. We don't respond. We're like, okay, thanks. But I'm like, so am I a sex worker? Because we make money off this as a business. So to, technically, we're, or like we sell sex toys, right? My mom and I own a mother-daughter owned sex shop called purepleasureshop.com. And so we're giving people orgasms. No, they're not masturbating to me, but like, so I like that. It sounds confusing. People are like, well, that's not sex work. But, I like when we broaden definitions of what things should be, because we're not as like limited and confined, like, the idea of like a prostitute, and it has to be, if you're having like penetrative sex, then it's sex work. But then we're saying that all sex is penetrative. And then I don't know. Anyways, tangent left and right.
No, that's exactly what my brain was doing. And that's why I started interviewing other sex-related professionals and not just everyday people, right? So the first couple of years, it was like, all individuals, mostly anonymous, some few brave souls who are willing to share their whole identities, which I think, think about if in this entire world, everyone who is like terrified because we can't talk about sex because we'll lose our corporate job. If all of those people were honest about what they were into, they can fire us all,
Yeah.
Like,
I don't think so.
Think
We need people to work. Yeah.
I know. So it really is. I mean, I know you guys are like proponents of the revolution and really like leading the way there. And I really just stumbled into it. But I started asking the question to myself, like, well, damn, if I'm a sex worker, am I a sex worker? Why am I not going all the way? And so I've been just slowly but surely gathering information to figure out where I fit the best. And the answer is, so far, I'm not a particularly effective sex worker. However, I am an incredible artist. Like, and I want to be really clear that I am not valuing artistry over craft at all. In fact, I like really, 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 really admire the sex workers that I have worked with and spoken to. And a lot of what I do now is helping them create slutty content. And so that is kind of the background. And I mean, Sex Stories is a mostly passion project, like funded by my own sex work and the creative work that I do with people one-on-one. And it has just been so fucking amazing to work with more and more people where sex is what they think about most of the day. For me, that's very exciting because I'm just like, I love learning.
Yeah. Well, speaking of learning, you've learned so much from the hundreds of people that you talk to from, Sex Stories, your podcast, and beyond. And so I'm curious, and this will just be like a generalized question that I think that will everyone wants to know. From all the hundreds of people that you've talked to and worked with, what have you noticed about the specific communication patterns between partners who have the most satisfying connected sex lives? Like, what the fuck are they doing and why are they doing it right?
I mean, I'm still trying to answer this in my own life, but the pattern that I observe in others, and especially when I work with people one-on-one, because I have a really great skill of being like, what about this? What about this? What about this? And helping hone in on people's priorities and then noticing their patterns together, right? And being like, well, why don't you try this? And then they're like, oh my God, it worked. And so I'm still learning to do that for myself. But the number one thing that probably is not a surprise to you is people who communicate clearly and honestly about their desires in an ongoing way have the closest, hottest sex. Like it's pretty much, that's the big kind of like distillation that I see. And, in my own life, when I am struggling with partners, it's usually because there is some sort of communication breakdown or, things get difficult for couples or moresomes when there is that kind of like standoff of resentment. And so usually it's not just communication, although that's the most obvious part. It's communication on top of sleep and like nutritious food and exercise and like a life where, both parties or all parties involved have manageable stress loads and have like a similar desire to prioritize one another. And so those are the pieces of, it creates a very, very deep rabbit hole. And that's before we've even gotten to the specifics of like, what kinks are you into? What desires do you want to explore next? Or rather, what fantasies are turning you on, and then what actually is a desire, which I think from your book is such an excellent delineation. I've been using that really, really clearly with partners and clients lately to be like, well, is that a fantasy or is it a desire? And kind of giving them that clarity between the two and how they can be different. So useful tools. But yeah, I would say that desire obviously is a component. And if people are in a space in their life where desire is absent on one or both sides, usually that's when I peel back the layers of, again, basic lifestyle. And that's also where I discovered kind of the link between regular everyday creativity, one might say. So, whether you're like putting together a spreadsheet or like figuring out what recipes to do for the holidays, or if you're an actual artist, usually if people are turned off creatively, and again, stress, lifestyle, etc., it's hard for them to be turned on sexually. So I kind of like to, and all this came from my years as a headshot photographer, right? Like when I was shooting headshots with people, I found that I was creating these like really intimate containers, especially with my longer, like 1 or 2 hour sessions. And people just started telling me everything, which I love, especially once I was like getting kinkier. And so, creating a space where people can tap into their creative parts without the expectation of any specific thing coming out of it, then usually makes them turned on in these other ways. And I get like really interesting, wonderful messages from people after they've kind of given themselves permission to like break through to whatever that next level is for them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really powerful work. And I 100% would agree with that. The communication, or is it Emily Morse? Dr. Emily Morse, who says communication is lubrication.
Lubrication. Yeah.
And then we say that in almost every podcast. Not that it's lubrication, but communication is being the most important thing. And it's pretty much the answer to most of the sex questions that we receive. There's other answers, but it's one of the primary answers that we're saying to almost every question. It's like, well, are you talking about it? And I know for a lot of people, they're like, oh God, here they go, talk about communication. But we cannot talk about it enough because
Absolutely.
it is important. And when I think of past lovers that I've had, if I have past lovers that the communication was completely on the table on both sides, like they're communicating about what they want, and what they don't want, when I'm doing the same thing. I don't have bad sex with those people. I might have, maybe it's not always like the best, but I have good to great sex with them. And it's the people where the communication has been missing, or at times in my life where I wasn't advocating for my body, or maybe I didn't understand my body. But when it was there, it's just this easy setup for better, more connected sex. It's just like it goes hand in hand with better, more connected sex. So
yeah,
you mentioned something about kink, and I want to
add one more thing to that.
Yeah.
I would also add that probably the number one thing I've noticed is not just like, go communicate. It's every single person communicates in such different ways, and words mean different things to different people, and words have different contexts to different people. So truly, the more people I interview, the less I feel like I know when it comes to sex and communication, because I'm like, oh my God, they're all so different. There is no one answer. So it's like, yes, I can tell people a million questions to ask their partners, but ultimately it's about figuring out what communication works between you and your individual partner or partners.
Yeah, 100%. Some people use more like body language communication. It's less words. And so there's no one right way, but you're learning to work with other people as 2+ different minds and ways of being. So, I mean, it makes perfect sense, but that's not what everyone's taught. Like, oh, we're all different. Oh, surprise. It applies to sex too. Every single person you have sex with. And if you've had sex with the same person for 5 years, they're changing every day too. Oh my God, surprise. It's so weird. We change every day. You were talking about kink, and I read something in your, it wasn't your bio, but something that you had stated. And I want to see, is it a secrecy kink or a secret kink?
It's a good question, right? Yeah. Like, I think collectively, people have kinks around secrets. And so I'm like, I think maybe we would call that a secrecy kink, because what I have learned, especially as a podcaster who people treat like a super secret slutty girlfriend, which I'm like, no, I'm not, I'm a podcaster, is that people really like to have this like little private container that maybe their partner does. Esther Perel writes about this really beautifully.
Like the mystery, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that I don't really have that. I'm like, hello, here is all of me. Would you like to know anything? I'll tell you everything. And then after like 5 years of doing that publicly, I'm like, oh, is that oversharing? But it depends on the person, right? And noticing how people do kind of present differently, right? Intimately, it's a beautiful space to create intimacy. And then there's the part of me that I'm like, oh, wait, I like enjoying other people's secret spaces because I feel like they are the most real with me. So like historically, I have been happiest as like the partner to a married person in an open relationship, but it's a don't ask, don't tell, which I personally don't actually really like a whole lot. But at the same time, I'm like, well, there's no expectations here. And I trust that person's just being themselves with me because we have this like little pocket that's so small. So that's just been one thing that I've been curious about a lot lately and have just started asking people about. But like, do you have like a secret zone where you're like, haha, this is just for me?
Yeah. So for me, I think I struggle with the balance of trying to share more truth sooner, right? And being really honest with, lovers and partners about all aspects of Amy. And I think that is really important when it comes to safety and trust. Like that's really important to me to receive and also to give. But, for me, I think that some of my fantasies and the things that just happen in my head, they don't all have to be shared. If I want to share, that's great. But and so some of it's kind of nice to just be like in my own internal space. I think it's more about, the things I'm doing with other people or my intentions with other people. And if I'm not sharing that with my partner, because my partner and I, we were monogamous for a couple of years, then monogamous. Now we're doing more non-monogamy with kind of more freedom there. But I'm hearing that. So secrecy kink is someone finding it erotic to have something that is personal to themselves that they're not sharing with the other world. There's something that is arousing or enticing or fulfilling around that, right? Like I keep this for myself. And Esther Perel's work will say, yeah, that's really important. If you are a complete open book with your partner about every single thing and you don't have anything personal to you, that might actually be an issue for connection and desire, right?
Yeah. And I think there is something so beautiful in if you are a person who continues to grow and change constantly, like they're never going to understand the mystery. And hopefully it's an ongoing dialogue. And I think, where I've been kind of noticing in my own personal life that secrecy, and then of course we get into a conversation about what's secrecy versus privacy and kind of like untangling that. But it creates a space for exploration and discovery without judgment, which I think is the valuable part. I'm also using the term kink here more broadly, like a la Existential Kink by Carolyn Elliott, which is sort of just like, it's a thing that maybe publicly we're not going to like cop to is our favorite thing, but like we clearly have a little something for it, and I think that's also really reflected in the culture of monogamy that we have, where it's like, no, be monogamous. It's okay if you cheat on your partner as long as they don't find out. I would never say it's okay to cheat on your partner. I would not me, and so it's like that's such a good example of the like implicit, explicit social expectations versus like what we say is okay versus what the normative behavior shows is okay. So that's what I really struggle with, right? Because in my perfect world, it would all line up. And I am such a consistent human. I create opportunities for novelty in my life at a huge degree, but like I will show up and do the same thing with my partner, not the exact same acts, right? But like I will be enthusiastic, I'll get excited, and I have learned how that can drive people away. I have this incredible intensity, and after interviewing so many people, I realize that I am pretty unique in that my desire is spontaneous and very high, like very high desire. And it still doesn't mean that I want to fuck every stranger who listens to me talk about that, right? And so I had to kind of learn that the hard way because I still get a lot of terrible invitations, but that's also why I just created a guide to irresistible invitations that starts with the very basic but so often overlooked piece of information that it's like, introduce yourself. Who the fuck are you if you're writing to an online stranger?
Yeah. And that's a question I have for later because I was like, what is irresistible invitation? So I want to know more about that shortly. I want to go to the bucket list. I think that will apply to a lot of people. We talk about, and this is not ours, right? A lot of people talk about the erotic menu and the importance of developing an erotic menu that's your yeses, nos, maybes, and it can constantly grow and shift. And so your work has led you to create an extensive erotic bucket list, right? It just keeps on growing and expanding. So first of all, what kinds of sexy things are on that list?
Too many, like literally too many things. It's currently around like 500 or 600 things, and that's created from both talking to people, from looking at lists on FetLife, from looking at lists of kinks, because there's so much that I want to, even if I don't have a specific kink, I want to play with a partner that does, and ideally document the process and like learn more about it, right? But the bucket list really started when I kind of did a whole life overhaul in 2016, 2017, where I was like, what do I care about? I'm going to shave my head. I'm going to travel around South America and figure out my values. And that's when I became committed to like living a creatively fulfilled life, whatever that meant. And so that led me to exploring kinky sex for the first time, which led me to transcendent sex, which led me to want to talk about sex, which led me to where I am now. And I think it's really important to say that I have this big, long bucket list, and I'm in theory like targeting stuff to cross off, but really it's a tool for conversation. Because personally, I feel that to just like have a to-do list that I'm crossing off in my sex life sucks. While it may be really cool to be like, hey, Cherie DeVille, awesome porn star, we talked on my podcast about you exploring my belly button. I'm ready to do that, even though I'm a little nervous. Would you like to do that? And then having kind of a play exploration session that we do on camera where we do that. But in my own personal life, I've just been crossing the shit off of stuff kind of like willy-nilly opportunistically. However, putting those things on my radar for my own personal bucket list helps me in the moment be like, oh, that is a yes. Or like, oh my gosh, that's not even on my list. And it's definitely something I want to do. Like I just got fisted for the first time. And that's
Yay.
on there, but I wasn't targeting that in November. It's just like it came up and I was like, yeah. So that's kind of how I've been using it. And I think ultimately, it's creating a template for my future edurotic content, and I'm working on retreats with industry folks where we can come, play, and create content, right? At all levels. So there'll be the more like safe for work sex industry folks, and then the people who are performer creators. And that's where I'm really, really excited to activate it. And I am noodling on like, do I want to open up? If there's someone out there who is public, who is an OnlyFans creator, who is a listener of my podcast, like maybe they can make an irresistible invitation. We can find overlap. But I would say most of the people who I hear from who just find me through the internet are like, hi, I'd love to do these weird, weird, weird things with you. No, you can't have a camera. Yes, it must be a secret. No, I expect you to drop your whole life and come fly to wherever I am. And I'm like, well, that's not what I'm doing here.
Yeah. So wait, I was going to ask this later, but can you explain more about this irresistible invitation? Because it sounds so interesting to me. I must know more.
So it's in its earliest stage right now. What is on my website is a basic 4-part. It's just a PDF, but it says like, if you want to invite me or anyone out, like number 1, who are you? Number 2, like why? Why you? Why me? Like what is our overlap? What do you think I will find interesting? Number 3, what are you actually inviting me to do? I have so many requests from people that are like, I like you. I found you on Field. And I'm like, what? Okay, I didn't match with you. There's no picture or name here. I'm not going to be a free tour guide for a complete stranger. What's the context? And then lastly, if I am a yes, because you've given me a really great introduction, I see the overlap. There is a great invitation there that is like specific to me, not just like, would you like to meet for coffee? I love coffee, but like I make it at home every day and it's delicious and I don't have to leave my house. Lastly, if I'm an easy yes, what are the next steps? When is it? Concretely. And so I'm like, if I got invitations like that, I might actually like fuck with dating apps or FetLife again.
Yeah. So the irresistible invitation is someone giving you more clarity, right? More honesty, clarity. Here's my intentions. Here's who I am. Here's my intentions. Here's what I'm desiring or what I'm interested in you. Instead of just like, hey, you're hot. Want to go on a date?
Yes. Okay. It's really inviting the asker to reflect on the other person's perspective and to give them an opportunity to provide value, relational value, whether it's any number of ways to provide value, right? And when I frame this to people, they're like, what do you mean provide value? And I'm like, yeah, go meditate on it. We might not be on the same page yet.
So is this, I was going to go to this later too, but I'm just going to free flow. Is this related to rejection then too? Because I was reading also, just switching gears. I mean, we all know rejection sucks balls, but it can teach us a few things. But I believe you've learned a lot from rejection and experiencing an immense amount of rejection. So what have you learned? And is the irresistible invitations a part of the learning?
Oh, yeah. I would say pretty much at this point, every single thing I have in my life that is some like attempt to control or structure things is kind of born out of my history of rejection. And I would say at this point, I probably have a rejection kink to the point where it's not like, oh, I'm waiting to get rejected again. It's just I've put myself in so many positions my whole life to be rejected that it's okay with me. And there's some part of me that's like, well, not that one. Yummy, yummy. Okay, move on to the next. And so I think also my background, also there was a point in time where I, for 2 years, worked with pickup artists producing their online reality show. And, through them, I learned a lot of things that I would do differently. But, they are like, it's just a numbers game. Rejection, for the most part, is not personal. It has more to do with the other person than me specifically. While it sucks, and especially if you're just trying to get laid and be nice, what I really have learned is try again, right? And I definitely created the guide to irresistible invitations because I also was rejecting a lot of people. And I'm like, you're so like, if you even gave me anything to go off of, maybe, but there's nothing here, right? And my sister was like, no, just ignore internet people. And I'm like, I'm going to try to help. Also, I want to connect with people, right? And so I think giving a template to be on the same page with people, especially since a lot of people I'm hearing from have a parasocial relationship with me, which that was a whole other learning curve I didn't know existed, it kind of helps set expectations, right? And I think that's a big part of a lot of rejection is it's like, well, what am I agreeing to? And what I've learned from my own communication blunders in the past is that I can be so, for many people, unsettlingly direct that it just shocks a nervous system and can be a literal turnoff. So I'm learning better how to like create that introduction, to set the stage, to go slow. And that way, when you get to the third point, the climax, it's like, oh yeah, I would love to go on a mountain hike with a picnic, and get to know each other in public first, since we're complete strangers to each other, before we go to a secluded situation. And so I am hoping that I can kind of use this framework to then practice reaching out to other people who are professionals who might want to be naked on camera with me, or maybe not. Maybe I'm just the camera lady, or maybe we'll see. But that is kind of my effort to invite people to at least kind of think through relationships from all sides, because I think that's the number one thing where I've gotten tangled before, is seeing only from my perspective, right? And when I zoom out and put on my compassion hat and put myself in their perspective, it's usually a different answer. And if I do that too often without a partner who is able to do the same, there's a big imbalance. So that's kind of what I'm trying to solve for, which is definitely related to rejection.
Yeah. I find rejection really interesting because everyone has experienced it, or most likely, and will at some point and many times in their lives, and will probably have to reject someone. And I think of Charlie Glickman, I believe, is the one who said this. He said a rejection is, rejection in casual dating, right? It's not a rejection of you because they don't know you as a person.
Yeah.
It's just they're declining an opportunity they had to do with you. But like you said earlier, it's not personal, yet that can still be hard for people. So I'm curious what your top tips would be for two things. Number one, how people can learn to better handle rejection. And what would be your top tips for someone who wanted to do the rejecting, meaning declining in an engagement with someone, whether it's sexual or not, in a way that feels more authentic and safe to do?
Oh, yeah. That's a great question. I'll take the second part first. I'm a big fan of Brene Brown's clear is kind mantra. I just believe that you don't need to don't give reasons why. Don't personally attack a person at all. Ooh, I shouldn't speak in don'ts. I'm practicing speaking in positives, which will be part of my answer for the first part of the question. But, thank the person, let them know you're not available. And I would say, don't say you're busy. Don't say any of that. Just be like, this isn't something I'm interested in. Or if you're too scared to do that, just redirect toward what you are available for. So I had a friend recently whose ex was just sending Spotify link after Spotify link, no context. And she finally was like, what do I do? How do I stop this? And I was like, well, what do you want to have happen? She's like, I just never need to hear from this person again, but I'm not blocking them because I want to leave lines open in case of emergency. And so I was like, well, how about you say something along the lines of like, hey, it seems like there's a desire to connect there, right? Keeping it grounded in reality. I'm noticing because of these communications that I'm not really open to friendship at this moment in time. I'm happy to let you know if that changes, but for now, I'd like to reserve open lines of communication for emergencies only. Happy holidays, wish you the best. So it's like clear and kind, but it's also very like, here's what I need. And so I think that is maybe the answer also to the first question, is like, focus on your needs. My needs are never the other person that's rejecting me. Like, that person is a curiosity. That's a whole mixture of a projected relationship that doesn't exist yet. My need might be a desire for connection. So if I'm rejected by my crush who I've, been bubbling up about for the past 6 months or whatever, I can go in the hot tub with my girlfriend. I can go find a date that wants to be with me. I can go to, I really think that finding community events is good, even if you don't know anybody. I'm a big fan of going out into the world where I'm a total stranger, which has been very interesting with hair. People are used to seeing me with a shaved head. I haven't really posted a lot of pictures with hair. So now I'm like, I'm in disguise everywhere.
You're like, you're wearing a wig, but it's not a wig. Yeah.
And so I think regrouping on what is actually feeding me, what is nourishing my soul, is my self-love up to the level where I want it? Like, have I taken myself on an artist date lately? I know a lot of people are very scared to go on dates alone. When I was traveling around by myself, it became one of my favorite, most luxurious things to do, to sit at a restaurant, to have my journal, to wander in a museum, and to just check in with my own desires, because when else in our lives do we get a chance to do that? So for me, those moments of rejection where maybe things aren't going my way are just an opportunity to be like, well, okay, I'm not going to spend Thursday night on a date. What could I do instead that would fill me up?
Yeah. And you find something else that fills you, that is nourishing. So and it's not to say that even when you do these practices, I'm doing practices in the air quotes kind of, but where you're nourishing your feeling of rejection, that you don't still feel like sadness, hurt, pain. So it's not like bypassing feelings, right? It's still like, okay, well, this doesn't feel good, but I'm saying it's not personal. It's not personal. And how do I tend to me? What is that? What sounds really yummy right now? And how can I do that? It's such a lovely gift to give yourself. And I think rejection can be really, really scary. So, okay, another question on rejection. When it comes to dating, or not dating, like erotic, romantic, sexual rejection, I personally think that when a long-term partner rejects you in a way where they're, if it's the extreme, like, I don't know if I want to be with you anymore, I don't know if I want to spend time with you today, I don't know if I want to have sex with you. That to me is a lot more challenging. Yeah, I still think a lot of it's not personal than like for me personally, if I was like, hey, I think you're really attractive, nice to meet you, blah, blah, blah. Would you like to have coffee sometime? And you're like, no, thank you. That to me is easier because I'm like, you don't know
Totally.
me.
You're
It's
not
fine.
invested.
Yeah, you're not invested. But still, what I would say for the people who feel rejected by people who you feel like really do know you, they still, one, don't fully know all of you. Just like, I mean, I don't fully know all of me too. I reject myself half the time. So
Yeah,
sometimes I'm
what a
like,
good point.
and so is that personal if I have moments where I'm rejecting, certain aspects of myself, like Amy wants to go and do a thing, but I'm like, oh, Amy can't do a thing. This is like happening in my own head. And that's its own form of rejection. I know people are like, you guys are going off on like all these weird levels of thinking, but so what do you think about that? Like the difference between the being or delivering a rejection in something that is more casual versus something that is more invested?
So my last serious-ish relationship ended when my former dominant, who was the person that like introduced me to kink, transcendent sex, after 5 years of an on again, off again thing, our relationship ended when in public he yelled at me something to the effect of like, "You're probably not even autistic, but there's definitely something wrong with you," and stormed away.
Holy shit.
And
yeah,
that was the end, and there had been lots of issues like leading up to that moment, which looking back on that last year, I'm like, oh, his behavior was already rejecting me, but his words were opposite, right? And this is someone who my little literal brain was like, you're saying forever in our fantasy talk. Is that a fantasy or do you mean it? Because like you are married. I don't know if that's helpful for me, and yet this was the person that in my adult life, I had shared more with than anyone else on the planet. I felt more deeply known, like this sense of trust that literally changed the course of my entire life. Without that partner, I would not be here today. I wouldn't be doing any of the things. I'd probably still be struggling to find good sex. Hopefully not. But, what a formative person for me. What an important person for me. I was so shocked that I couldn't drive for like a couple hours and I was in West Hollywood, so I was just like wandering around. I ended up at the like Restoration Hardware and just sat on a bunch of different couches very slowly because I was in shock. I didn't know what to do. I didn't think this person was ever going to leave my life, certainly not like that. And it's been just over 2 years since then, and it took a lot of journaling. It took a lot of being sad. It took a lot of reminding myself that even though still sometimes it feels like I'll never, ever find someone who scratches that same itch, who cares about me in the same way, like knowing that that's a story and it's okay. It's okay if I never have the same type of sex again. I will have something else, but not if I'm only focused on what I don't have, right? And so that's where in those moments where I'm so sad, casual sex it's not the same thing. But for me, it is a different sort of nourishing touch. And then it still brings up the parts where it's like, but it's not like that person. And so this is where the fact that I've been meditating every day since August 8th, 2016 comes in handy, is that I'm able to just notice the really bad, sad, hard feelings. And do I need to journal about them? Do I need to exercise? Do I need to go on a run? Like what does that particular moment and that particular day need? And then I just get comfy with the fact that I am not happy in that moment right now. And I always am a person that sees feelings as an indication that there's a change that wants to be made, and I don't rush it. I just let it unfold in its own timing and do my best to anchor into friendships, family relationships, and nourishing, connections in the world, including with myself, so that I can be a better version of a partner to my own self, right? Because I was only in that now toxic relationship for the last couple of years because I'd let that stuff slide and because I was like scrabbling to have my desires met from this person. So it was really a big opportunity for me to kind of like take a breath, know that I was going to be in pain for a while and not wallow in it unless I needed to, right? There are definitely those days where it's rainy and cozy and I just needed to play music and cry a lot, and then finding other people who were going through something similar. Like I ended up working very closely with a good friend who was also processing a breakup. And so, between that and therapy, right? Like I'm a big proponent of therapy. I'm in EMDR therapy now. I was just in regular like talk analysis for a while. Yeah. So those are kind of my main tangible. And if someone can't afford therapy, if it's not accessible to you, if it's not what you want, journal deeply and make sure that it's a curious, gentle, loving form of journaling, right? My early journaling was like anxiety-filled, judgment-riddled stuff that looking back, I'm like, oh, that deepened the grooves of like self-loathing. And so, curious journaling has been one of the most always
curious. I love that curious journaling.
Yeah. Just remaining curious about whatever is coming up for me and not trying to solve it, but just being like, who are you, little voice? What do you
Mhm.
have to say? What do you need?
Yeah. Have you ever heard of IFS or done IFS therapy, internal family
Internal family
systems?
system. I've
Yeah.
only heard about it once on a podcast in the context of they were talking about how useful it is for talking
To
to
the
people
parts.
who
Yeah.
the
Or,
parts, but
yeah.
but in the context of like people who are at risk for suicide, because
Oh.
it's usually
Mhm.
just one tiny little part, and if you can
Mhm.
talk to that part and find out what it needs, then hopefully people don't kill themselves.
Yeah.
I'm condensing it too smally, but yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly just like that, like Inside
Yeah.
Out, but grown up version.
Yeah, it's like, who's this one? Okay, this is like the protector, my
Yeah,
bodyguard, or there's like a firefighter. There's all these different parts, and I just love all the modalities of more like somatic imaginary therapy, or like using our brains and imagination to get curious about like whose voice is this? Is this mine? Is this someone else's? How long has it been here? What is it trying to say? And I love also what you said about feelings being indications for something that wants to change. And like I've felt that way about feelings for a long time, so, especially that I don't like this feelings, but like, okay, but it's saying something,
yeah,
some sort of discomfort or negative self-talk in me is saying something to me about something that should or not should, I don't want to should myself, but wants to shift. And I can
yeah,
ignore it and feel more stuck, or I can sit with it and be really patient with it, and just see what happens. You speak words, or you bring words to your own process in a way that I think gets, at least for me, it gets my mind thinking. I think it's really, really awesome. And so you have a whole podcast. I know we're going to guest on your podcast at some point, the Sex Stories podcast that everyone should definitely check out. And I don't, that's not all that you do though. So can you tell us more about your offerings and how people can work with you, all the fun, juicy ways to get more Wyoh in their lives, but not in a creepy way?
totally. Yeah, I mean, Sex Stories is definitely great for anyone who loves kind of the like audio voyeur experience of just hearing about other people's, loves and desires. So that is just my personal like pleasure passion project for the rest of forever, but it's kind of in the background of my life. I work right now primarily with sex workers who want help and support creating content with someone who is deeply invested in that world. And then also I work with a lot of my listeners, whether they are solo humans or couples or sometimes moresomes.
Mhm.
And that can look any number of ways, right? So my origin is as a photographer and filmmaker. So sometimes a one-on-one photo session is just like me being a photo dom, and that can have a kinky element to it or not, right? So I help people do a lot of like nude discovery. Like lots of people who I have worked with in the past have never felt comfortable in their naked body, certainly not on camera. So that's something I've facilitated for lots of people. For some people, they just want a dominatrix style, like barking at them while they touch themselves. So it's sort of like an in-person JOI. I'm never touching them, right? Because touch in a session like that is not legal. I always do legal and consensual things. And then more often than not, I'm doing some form of creative breakthrough session or mini retreat where maybe someone wants to figure out the sex storyline of a character they're writing. Maybe they also need like a headshot. Maybe they're not really sure what they're doing, but they just feel generally stuck. And so we tend to have sort of a play day, which like I always start and finish with portraits because I think that's a really good way to get a human to drop into their body. And I'm really good at making them breathe and like let go until the way that they feel matches what I see in the camera. And that's like my unique skill as a photographer that I don't really know how to words other than that. But that pretty much is the basis for if we paint together, if we collage together, if we're just talking, if we're, so creating like an arts and crafts day for grown-ups. And then in the background, we're usually talking about personal stuff, vulnerable stuff, sexy stuff. It kind of helps people get to the next level however they want.
Mm.
And sometimes they bring partners in, they talk about relationship stuff. I think people, I've observed that people tend to make more work when they have that kind of container of privacy and secrecy where they can really explore themselves. So that is my favorite, although I fucking love coming in and helping couples make like slutty, smutty, erotic videos and stills for themselves, like for their own private pleasure. That's a lot of what I do.
I mean, I thought I had the best job in the world, but you might have a better job because
it's really good.
yeah, yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah, I love everything that you're creating and offering, and I know that there's so much more that you are going to continue to do and to give to the world. So, will you just remind our listeners the best way to find your podcast, find you on the socials, all the things?
Oh yeah, everything is at wyohlee.com/link. So that's WYOHLEE.com.
All right. Go and find Wyoh on all the things. And thank you so much for sharing all of your gifts. And there's so much more that we could probably talk for hours upon hours. And let's see, to all of our listeners, go and rate your favorite podcast. Well, go and rate Sex Stories. Go and rate us. We really benefit from the reviews. It helps people find us from all over the world, people who need more shameless sex or more sex stories in their lives. And also support your local or favorite artists, also known as people who create content like Wyoh, what Wyoh's doing, and other people that are doing various offerings that you could potentially find for free, such as porn, or you could pay money to the people that you want to support, or like Shameless Sex with our wonderful book that's out there called Shameless Sex. And if you did buy our book, please go rate us on the avenue that you bought the book, because that helps people and go find our book as well. Okay, I think that's most of the things that April would have said, because she's not here, but she's just arriving. I see her with her cute little dog, her little dog too. They are just arriving. So we love you, April. And thank you, Wyoh, for coming on our show.
Thank you.
And yes, and to all of our listeners, we will see you next Tuesday as we always do. And ciao for now.